Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Oliver Maruda from the Whisky List, and on behalf of David Ligoff and the entire Whisky Show team, welcome to today's virtual USA Whisky Show. Just letting people start joining the live stream. I can see the counter going up. We've got some excellent guests today in motion. Just letting the counter go up as people join. Here we go. Good to see people joining. We'll give it a 30 seconds and then we'll kick off. Now today's whiskey tasting, bit of fun, kick back, enjoy, take your time through the whiskeys. There's no rush. If you have, get your tasting glasses ready to go. A bit of water on the side if you need to dilute or some ice. Whiskey's about drinking personal preference here at home, so take your time to enjoy it. Hopefully all your Whisky Show kits have arrived. I've got mine here as well to try along at home with you. Letting a few more people join and then we will kick off. All right, so as mentioned before, my name is Oliver Maruda, and on behalf of the Whisky Show today, welcome to the virtual USA Whisky Show. This is our 9th virtual show since we started them when the pandemic hit Australia back in April 2020. So our very first Whisky Show, the virtual one that we did, was a USA one, and we had a special guest from Woodford Distillery, Master Distiller Chris Morris, which was, a bit nerve-wracking for me because that was my very first virtual stream ever that I'd done, and to get an interview of that caliber with Chris Morris himself. So a lot of knowledge was shared. If you have time, go back and watch that live stream. It's it's on our YouTube channel, it's on our Facebook, it's on our socials. But yeah, it's a great interview. But today we got 9 brands that we're representing in your kits with 18 different whiskies. Now these shows that we've designed there, try at home at your own pace. So in the 2-hour live stream today, we're not going to go through all 18 whiskies. We encourage you to take the time at home to go through them. We're going to go through one whiskey per brand each. So we're going to go in about 9 whiskies in total today to taste. So let me just show you, for those who are tuning at home, who unfortunately, we were limited by the number of kits with the whiskey available to sell, but all 150 kits have sold out. We've sold out every virtual show, but those at home who are tuning in who haven't seen, these are the kits that everyone's gotten. So impressive little kit there. And then as part of each kit, you get a little tasting sheet with some basic information about the whiskey, but more importantly, there's an app. So if you go download the app has all the information about the whiskey, information about the ABV, the pricing. There's some videos that each of the distilleries have provided about each of the whiskies. So that's the front sheet there. That's the back sheet there that you can see. And this is an example of the app as well. So this is the screenshot I used for the virtual Aussie show back in July, but still applies here. Go in, you can browse every whiskey, watch the videos about the whiskey, rate. Rate is really important because when you are rating the whiskies, and if you rate all 18 whiskies for the USA show, you instantly go into the running to win some bottles of whiskey, the 2 bottlings exclusive for the American Whisky Show today, which we'll be chatting about shortly. You'll go in the running to win. We'll give out one of each, both the Barrel and the Rye, for someone very lucky. There'll be 2 winners in that. So just download the app. All the instructions are in your little tasting sheet there. So if you rate all 18 whiskies, you go in the running. And of course, you can also buy any of the whiskies that we're trying today, so that you can buy directly in the app. And I've sent an email out earlier today with instructions if you just want to go on the website directly. So that's just the basic setup all done and dusted. I might welcome David Ligoff and all our guests. Let me just change the view so we can see all our awesome faces. David, Christian, Steph, and Dave. Welcome, everyone.
Harley, it seems like a lifetime ago since we had the first show. We're on our 3rd generation packaging, and it'd be good, those of you who are watching and listening at home, just to put in the chat if you were lucky to be part of our first virtual show, which actually was the first virtual whiskey show in the world, because it was only about 3 weeks after global travel lockdown and nobody could actually have shows. So that would be fantastic to see who our serial offenders are. And we've come a long way, and it's good to be back and seeing the old brands and old faces again.
And if you are commenting from Facebook, just so the live streamer software you're using actually kind of puts through your name, so we can put you up on the chat here. Any comments that we want to promote, just click on that link, streamyard.com/Facebook. It'll give you the permissions for us to see it. Otherwise, let's we've got distillers and brand representatives from Virginia, Colorado, and Oregon joining us in our first hour. Christian from Westward, welcome, mate.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And we've got Dave from Reservoir. He's just sipping back.
Thanks a lot for having us. Appreciate it.
Awesome. And Steph is joining us representing Barrell and Stellum today.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Awesome. Well, I believe we've chatted enough. Let's actually get into the whiskey. We might start off with there's some good ones to go. Let's go with the Westward, the sourdough.
Sure. So this is, you don't have a picture of the bottle, but that is the bottle that it comes in. It's landed in Australia now, and it's been there for a little while. Is everyone tasting along? Is that?
Yeah, that's what we're encouraging everyone to crack.
So Westward is distillery in Portland. We've been around for about 18 years. We specialize in American single malt. So my background was in beer and brewing, and so you'll really see that kind of provenance come through the entire line of our whiskeys. This particular whiskey, though, is completely out in left field for us. It's not, whereas what we typically do is use aseptic practice. So we're operating like a brewery. We're pitching a single ale yeast strain, cleaning the whole process, sanitizing the wash, and so forth. In this case, I was drinking whiskey one night, as one does, with a friend of mine who's a sort of a famous baker in the United States, and he asked, can you make whiskey with a sourdough starter? And I said, shit, I don't see why not. So the next day he showed up with a liter jar of his levain, and we built it up. We have yeast brink and yeast propagator and so forth. We built it up to a full batch size, which for us is about 12,000 liters. And the fermentation was challenging. It was a lot longer than our typical 6-day ferment. It was more like 15 days, but really had a long time to develop some really interesting esters. And it's something that's come through in repeated batches. Now we've done about 5 batches. So on the nose, you're going to get some of the vanillins and some of the phenols from the barrel, because we are aging in new white oak charred barrels. But you also get a really nice bright fruit quality, and it's a flavor that's going to go through the entire experience. You're going to get it on the nose, you're going to get it on the palate, and on the finish. And this sort of bright, crisp passion fruit. So you get the passion fruit along with the vanilla caramel on the nose. On the palate, you'll see that it's, if you're familiar with our other whiskeys, what really sort of differentiates them is that they're very creamy, very rich, very robust. Whereas this you're gonna experience it on the palate as a much more sort of lighter, crisper mouthfeel. And it's really gonna highlight, again, that passion fruit on the palate, and then nice, long, spicy, fruity finish.
So for those trying this whiskey for the first time at home, just put your feedback in the comments. Let us know what you think. Christian, I'm getting that obviously it's a sourdough like set up in terms of this, but for me the cereal notes, it's just highlighted. That's the very first thing that comes to mind. It's like it's a liquid porridge.
Yeah. I mean, it's 100% malted barley, all Northwest, Pacific Northwest 2-row. And the sourdough, the yeast and bacteria in that sourdough levain sort of have spent countless generations living in predominantly a wheat environment, but they really took to the barley, and really, like you said, highlighted a lot of that cereal that you get. We are pot distilling, so a lot of that it's double pot distilled, so a lot of those cereal characteristics come through.
Awesome. All right. Well, can you tell us what's the ABV on this one, or the proof?
It is 45% ABV, 90 proof in the bottle, and that's typical. Most of our bottlings are at 90 proof. Some are at 90, 92. So we sort of typically, though, 45% ABV is our usual.
And unlike some of the others whiskeys that we're trying tonight, you only specialize in single malts.
Yeah, we have. I think the other whiskey that's in the kit is we call it a 2 malts because we're using malted rye. It's about 32% malted rye, 33% malted rye, and 67% malted barley. So it's kind of funny that those are the two whiskeys that are in the kit are very special. They're unusual for us, but 98% of what we make is single malt.
Christian, there was been some chatter in the news recently about the categorizing or tightening up the definitions of American single malt. Is that because there's just a lot more on the market that how did that come about?
Yeah, well, so it's a really new category in the U.S. Of course, and bourbon really blazed the trails for us, and they sort of showed the way by banding together and by urging our regulator, the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, to kind of codify, to put some guardrails on the category so that there were some definitions so the consumer would understand what they were getting. And so we wanted to do the same thing 5 years ago at a convention in Chicago. Sort of the maybe 10 of us who were the most committed to American single malt at the time got together and created this American Single Malt Whiskey Commission. And we've been lobbying for the purpose of, marketing, making trade and consumers aware of the category, and then trying to sort of protect the category, not to make it exclusive. We really wanted to create a large tent so that, we would be inclusive rather than exclusive, but we wanted some guardrails around it, around, what proof you distill and where it's made and so forth. So very much, the regulations are what you would expect from, it's sort of a mashup between Scottish single malt and an American bourbon regulations, but pretty broad. And so it allows for either pot or column distilling. We wanted to really set it up so it allowed for innovation and experimentation.
Got a couple of comments coming through. Thanks for that explanation as well. Just wanted to raise this question from Ian on YouTube's Ask for you, Christian. Does it use regular yeast along with the sourdough, or just the sourdough itself?
Just the sourdough, yeah. Just the bread, basically the levain from Ken's Artisan Bakery. At the start of the pandemic, his sourdough bread baking cookbook shot up to in the top 10 of the New York Times bestsellers list. So
there you go. So you're drinking very fancy bread, very in high demand.
Liquid bread, as the Germans would call it.
Love it. And we're getting some great comments around dangerously easy to drink. I posted up earlier, highlighted, and Cameron saying really tasty, easy to drink whiskey. So congrats on that. We might jump onto the next whiskey in our lineup. Thank you, Christian. That was whiskey number 11 for those just joining and catching up. That's what we had before. Our next one might move over to Dave from Reservoir. Dave from Denver. Sorry, from where are you based? Virginia. Sorry, got my notes mixed up there. Welcome, mate. I believe you've just flown in from Europe as well.
I have. Thanks for having me, guys. I have one quick question for Christian before we get started.
Yeah, sure.
Is the sourdough, traditionally the way you do sourdough is you sit it out and you're catching wild yeast, right? Is the method like with making whiskey, the old school way of doing it, Europe and the US was, for example, you go pick apples off the ground and you collect the yeast off the apples. Was it kind of like doing it in a really, really traditional way?
I mean, that's where the sourdough came about. Is Ken Forkish, who's the baker, he employed a very traditional method where he would work the dough in an open house. So you're getting the microflora that's coming in off the wheat, which is local, but also whatever's in the air and on the cooking, on his hands, under his fingernails.
Yeah.
And so it really, there's a lot of discussion right now. The topic of terroir with whiskey is very popular. Mm-hmm. And typically that discussion is revolving around the soil and the climate where the grain was grown. But I think potentially more importantly is the terroir of the microflora. That's what's all around you,
I'm super excited that you said that, because that is a perfect lead into some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about. Love it.
We worked earlier.
Kismet. So I am David Cutno. I'm one of the founders of Reservoir Distillery. We started all the way back in 2008. We were actually the third distillery outside of Kentucky making bourbon, if you can believe that. Back then, we were called micro distilleries. Not even craft was coined as a term. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the background on what Reservoir is, how we do things, because it's going to be really, really important to talking about the wheat whiskey that we make. So when we started, we wanted to do things really, truly grain to glass. Grain to glass is the term now. But for us back then, we've never sourced anything in all the bottles that we've done in the last 14 years. What we do is purely Virginian. And we're talking about terroir, and I'm going to get into something really interesting about what Christian was talking about with the quote terroir of the yeast. Everything that we work with is grown within 40 miles of the distillery. We know all of our farmers. We have one farmer, he's the world record holder for corn, believe it or not. It's about 560 bushels per acre. And I'm looking at my director of distillery education, who's off screen, and she's going to nod yes, that's the right number. Yeah, she's saying yeah. He also grows our wheat. Here's an interesting little tidbit. If you don't know much about farming, one farmer will never grow both wheat and rye. And the reason is because both of those grains look very similar. And if they get mixed up and the crop gets a little bit of cross-contamination, then the crop really isn't worth anything. They can't sell it. So these guys always have kind of a separation of church and state when it comes to wheat and rye. But you will find a rye farmer growing corn or a wheat farmer growing corn, because they look so different that they can actually clean that stuff up. So we've got a number of different differentiating factors, but really what we do is we do it in the method that hasn't changed in 5,000 years. So we're very much vertically integrated. So we bring in our grain, we grind all of our grain. We only do single grain mash bills. And this is actually really key. The things that we do every day, our production is 100% corn, bourbon, 100% wheat whiskey, and 100% rye. Now, the way that you have to do that is obviously you have to use enzymes, right? But it's a bit of a nod to the guys over in Scotland. And one of the cool things that we figured out after, building these, it took us about 8 years to figure this out, but you can actually take those single grains and vat them in a glass and then recreate any mash bill that you want. So I think in your kits, you've got a wheat and a rye, and I'm pretty sure you got our bourbon as well. If you take those kind of the three main grains that are typically used to build bourbons, you can vat them up and try to make one of your favorites from 1960 if you can't find it anymore. We also do open top fermentation. open top fermentation is actually surprisingly unique. Not as many people do it anymore. Most people tend to actually have a temperature controlled closed top so that they can speed up the fermentation, or at least keep it to a range of 3 to 5 days. I know I heard Christian how long it took him to do his sourdough mash. We typically run between 5 days to sometimes as long as 11 days. And oh, sorry, I'm being told that's incorrect. It's actually 14 days, so sometimes as long as we go, because we don't temperature control the distillery, so we let it run just basically on ambient. But this is what's really cool about the terroir of wild yeast that Christian mentioned. One of the neat things is that we have above our still this massive fan, and what it does is originally put in for safety measures, and it blows out of the distillery. So it creates a column of air above the main rectifier still, and so it pulls air up. In case there's ever an accidental release, it's going to take some of that ethanol vapor and take it upstairs. But one of the things that we do is we throw the roller door open, and it brings air in across all of our open top fermenters and then up and out the ceiling. So in our neighborhood in Virginia, in about a 5-block square area, we have 9 breweries, 2 cideries, 3 cideries, a meadery, and then us, and plus an urban winery as well. So that's a lot of different yeast that's like floating around the air just from the production facilities that those guys have, not to mention just the main wild yeast. And that stuff's being pulled in. It's what we like to refer to as friendly bugs. So we have the yeast that we work with, and we have our own line that we propagate and we utilize. But we've got these friendly bugs that come in. It's one of the things that really, if you have a proper distilling setup, you could take mine and you could move it, say, to Oregon, and you're not going to be able to produce the same whiskey that we produce here in Virginia. And it's because of things like the friendly bugs and the climates and how things actually ferment. But one of the neat experiments that we have going on is, since we've been bottling going back to 2010, you can actually track in all of our reference bottles when a different brewery in the neighborhood opened and how it kind of changed the character of the whiskey, which is kind of fun. So we enjoy doing fun things like that. Then you get away from there. We do a lot of the same things that other guys do, which is twice distilled, pot distillation, where we have really good control over our cuts. But one of the big differentiating factors is that we've been using quarter casks for a very long time. Quarter casks are a production technique that you really have to produce the right juice in order for it to work, because as these things age, there's a timing issue, right? Your maturation of your whiskey that goes in, that works on a standard timeline. But if you have a smaller cask, you've now changed the wood surface area to volume of liquor ratio, and you will get wood extraction quicker. So you're actually now playing with those compounds that come in, and they're going to be oxidizing at a certain rate. And you've changed the relationship between those two things. Now you can right side them by working with how you distill, and then you can produce a product that is going to taste more like a longer aged product in a 53-gallon cask, or you can do it in a smaller cask. So what we have here with these wheat whiskeys is our quarter casks that have been aged for about 3 years in 40-liter gallon. Is that right? Is that the ones that we sent them? 40 liters? Yeah. Yep. So those guys will come out about 3.5 years, and they will rep. Well, you guys can tell me exactly where it comes out on a flavor basis. But for wheat whiskey, the neat thing about wheat whiskey, not a lot of people do it. And when we first started making this back in 2008, there were only 2 guys that I knew of in the US. And if anybody knows of someone else, then please let me know. But it was Bernheim's out of Kentucky, and then Dry Fly out of Washington State were the only 2 wheat whiskeys I knew of. But I'd worked with the grain at the distillery that I learned and trained at, and really liked it, and said, well, why don't we make one for fun? It's a very doughy, and I'd love to put it up next to the sourdough whiskey and see what that tastes like. That'd be pretty interesting. But it's a very soft whiskey, and here's a note on how I describe whiskeys. We very much look at tasting notes. It's a little bit like you can give a man a fish and he can eat for a day, or you can teach a man to fish and he can eat for a lifetime. With whiskey notes, we really kind of talk more about like, okay, how's the whiskey built? Now you drink and experience it, and then you kind of build your own tasting notes, because you got primary, secondary, and tertiary notes that come out, and not everybody tastes things the same. It's kind of the classic example that I use is, some people love mushroom pizza. I can't stand it, but that doesn't mean that it's bad. A lot of people like it. And it's the same kind of thing with tasting notes. So a wheat whiskey for us, we typically, with the 3 whiskeys that we make that are single grains, we always have people approach them from wheat first, then the bourbon, then the rye. And the reason why we do that is that wheat as a whiskey is very subtle. There's a lot of delicate notes in it. It's very soft. It has a very, very long finish, and it's very soft around the edges. Now you move up into corn. Corn is very bright. It's a little bit more right down the middle of the fairway. And then you have rye, which is very spicy. It's got a short stop finish, and it's very sharp around the edges. And so we'll do things like throw a little bit of wheat on top of the rye. And what that does is it adds a nice long tail. It rounds out those sharp edges. It makes a really beautiful combination. This is the type of thing when you look at traditional bourbons. Most traditional bourbons are rye, but then there's several varieties of bourbons that are wheated. And it's the differences in grain that really affect what those profiles are, not only just on tasting notes, but mouthfeel and finish. All those pieces matter. So the fun thing that you can do with what we have sitting in your kits is you can get a pure note and kind of get what wheat does, what corn does, and what rye does. And then once you have those, just play with them, or you can take somebody else's whiskey and start breaking it down and seeing what's really in it. So I've been sipping on the wheat whiskey since maybe about 10 minutes before this thing started. So I know what it kind of tastes like, but definitely
before
into it, get in there.
Before we jump into your tasting notes, I'm going to put up a few comments that are coming up. Paul says, disliking mushroom pizzas. What kind of monster are you?
You know what? Every day I do this because I've got kids as well. I'll try to eat mushrooms when they come across my plate, because one should always try something new every day, and definitely do that in spirits, because you never know what you're going to have. And really it's going to take you in a whole different direction. I used to never drink scotch. Now that's like, I got about 250 bottles of those in my own private bars.
Nice.
It would open up a whole bad habit.
Now, I just realized we're going a little bit quite technical here, so I might just peel it a little bit back. So a lot of people, this might be your very first time drinking an American whiskey. So
Sure.
The process of making Whiskey 101, my 30-second spiel is you get your grain, and Scotch predominantly uses malted barley, but in America you use wheat, as you mentioned, rye, and corn. A lot of distilleries will put a mixture, and that's called a sour mash, into your fermentation. You ferment it, you boil it, you add some yeast that turns the sugars into alcohol. You then distill it twice, and then in America, that's different to the rest of the world. You have to put it into a virgin vessel, a cask that has never had another spirit in it before. That's what we mean by virgin. And then there's other more technical rules around the ABV and how long it can be. But that's kind of whiskey making 101 in the States, as I understand it. And unlike a lot of other bourbons and ryes out there, what Reservoir really specializes in is you do all your releases are 100% one grain. So when you buy a bottle of the wheat, it's only wheat grain that is in your bottle that we're drinking in this sample number 7. And the other sample that we provided is the
I think it's the rye that they got.
No, we did the bourbon today in these kits.
Okay, great.
So that's 100% bourbon. So when you're drinking a lot of other distilleries in the kits today, it'll be a mixture of different grains. But what we wanted to highlight with Reservoir is you're trying 100% that grain. And in this case, it's wheat that we're trying with whiskey number 7. So I just wanted to highlight that's something quite unique. And I think that's the only one in the kits that are doing 100% wheated whiskey here today. We've got a couple of questions. Are you planning on producing 100% barley malt?
Well, there actually is some of that in our rick house. we've got several thousand barrels in our rickhouse now at this point, and we got a lot of different really cool experimentations that we've done. But yes, there is some what would be called American single malt. A funny quick story just to kind of give you an idea of, we don't make defibrillators, we make whiskey, and we like to have fun doing it. We tried to make Octamor. If anybody knows what Octamor is, it's one of the most heavily peated whiskeys out there. And we actually had some Irish peat and took it to a local butcher who had a massive industrial smoker. And we took a bunch of malted barley and put it in there and then smoked it with this peat and distilled it. Didn't quite come out as Octamor, as a little bit more of a Speyside, but yeah, we've got some stuff that's still aging, and we'll do like a little release of something like that for people to try.
Awesome. And I've got another question here. I'd love to see a peated Reservoir release, so looking forward to that. But Ian asks, for quarter casks, do you need a different cask profile than a full-size cask?
So the interesting thing about using quarter cask is the only difference with them is that it's just the size, the volume size. And these are things that they're not new. The Scotch guys have been using them since kind of time began. What we do is we work so closely with our coopers that we'll go so far as taking down trees in Virginia, cutting them up into staves, aging them right, and then making barrels, and then getting char on them. And our char is actually, it's a very, very big deal for the profile that we have that you taste. It's called an Alligator Char. And an Alligator Char, you might hear about when people say, oh, whiskey's got a char 1, 2, 3, 4 type thing, 4 being the heaviest. An Alligator Char is you burned it so deeply that it embers up, and when it cools, it looks like alligator skin on the inside. And that's typically, depending on who you talk to, about a 5 or a 6. So from the standpoint of structurally, are the barrels different from a 53? Not much. It's just kind of like they've been shrunken down, and this is the way that it's been done forever. But the key is that it's very different than, say, a column still versus a pot still, and the profile of the actual juice that you're producing matters as to how it works within that barrel, right? So you build your barrel, and you build your barrel the best way that you can. There's a bunch of things that you can play with, like how thick the staves are, so it controls how it breathes, how tight the grain is. The terroir of the oak is a big deal, just like the grain of the oak is a big deal, just like the yeast is, like we talked about. All those things matter into the actual flavor of the whiskey. But in our case, we use it's an old cognac still. Actually, it's an Armagnac still, but 5% Armagnac stills are cognacs. But I'm getting off track. It's a really beautiful eau de vie still, and it gives you a lot of control over the more volatile alcohols that you can get out of that, and you can actually set up a profile that will work with that. If I just took a straight continuous still and tried to put that in a quarter cask, it's just not really going to work exactly right. It doesn't mean that it's going to be bad. It's just going to be different. That's all. And I don't really think that there's any there's a wrong way or a right way necessarily to do this stuff. The only thing that really matters is that when you taste it, do you want another? And that's it. So I think you should always have an open mind on any of these spirits that you try. I just came from Germany. There's a lot of crazy stuff that they have over there. And, just give it a shot, just like mushrooms. Bring it full circle. Back to mushroom pizza.
I'm really enjoying your weighted release here. It's you have to go back for a couple sips to, I think, understand the full flavor profile. But I've got 2 questions coming through, and then I know Steph's keen to talk about her whiskeys, so we'll keep things moving. But very quick yes or no from Emma's asking, you've got that cider house you mentioned close by. Are you going to do a cider cask finish?
We do have some cider cask barrels. We have some Bluebee barrels. If Bluebee Cidery, which is a local cidery near us, that's really great, that we have some whiskey finishing in. We've got a lot of different really cool finishing projects that you guys might see in Australia soon. We've got a great one with Francois Voyer, which is a really beautiful cognac house. That'll be we're just looking at like how we're going to pull it out and what we're going to do with it. So no ETA on that, but we've got things that are in Burgundy Grand Cru casks and all sorts of things. So we like playing around and cider. Yeah, like definitely with our neighbors. We got a lot of projects with our neighbors. Because again, remember, we don't make defibrillators. We make whiskey. It's supposed to be fun.
Very true. And I actually was thinking about this question too, but Dave puts it into words way better than I could. How do you get 100% grain to ferment in the absence of a malted barley?
Yeah. So when I was learning to distill, I'll just tell you a little story to kind of explain it. When I was learning to distill, and small background on me, I'm actually an electrical engineer by training. And so as an engineer, you look at the systems and you kind of go like break them down. You're like, okay, how does all this work? So when I learned to distill, classic kind of bourbon mash bill, and I had malted barley in it, and I was looking at it. And the malted barley traditionally is in there for enzymatic processes to help convert long chain sugars to short, so the yeast can eat them and you get more alcohol. And they were using enzymes as well. And I was like, well, if you're using enzymes to do this, well, why use enzymes? You have malted barley. And they're like, oh, everybody uses enzymes. You have to. Like everybody, all the big guys do it. You just got to, otherwise you're not going to get enough alcohol. And it's just the business won't work. And I said, okay, well, if that's the case, why do you need the malted barley at all? Because it is really one of the most expensive components of the grain profile. And they kind of said, like, I don't know, for flavor. And then I was like, well, if you just really need one or the other, it just in my head, it kind of clicked. It's like, wouldn't it be easier instead of weighing out all these mash bills to just do one grain and use enzymes? And I wish I could say it was something more elegant, but it was a little bit of me being lazy that I was like, hey, let's try this. And it actually came out really nicely, and we were really happy with it. And we're very proud of this whiskey, and I hope that you guys enjoy it.
Top work. I've tried all three of your expressions that we've started bringing in on behalf of Reservoir down under here in Sydney, and some of the independents online are already starting to stock it. So we're getting some great feedback. So congrats to Reservoir, Dave. I might keep things moving on to welcome Stephanie Bear who's representing Barrell and Stellam. Steph, how are you today?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. And you're in the hotel in Denver, Colorado at the moment, yeah?
I live in Denver, but I am in a hotel in Las Vegas currently because we had some Total Wine events this week.
So double booked for events this weekend.
It's the only way to do it.
Well, thank you for making the time. We might actually kick off with the Barrell, the Bourbon, the Whiskey Show exclusive, if you want to take us through that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing to mention when you talk about who we are at Barrell Craft Spirits is that we're what you would call a merchant bottler. So we don't actually distill anything ourselves. We are based in Louisville, Kentucky, but the majority of our portfolio is made up of cask strength blends of different whiskeys from different producers in different states that exhibit different flavor profiles. And our whole sort of mission statement is that we create barrel products that are greater than the sum of their parts. So we taste through all of these different barrels that are available for sale, and we sort them by flavor profile, and we'll say, these barrels are really oaky, these barrels are really fruit forward, these barrels are really herbaceous, these barrels are really spicy. And then we'll take the flavor profiles that we're really interested in working with, that we just think taste cool, or we just think would be cool to see what happened if we blended them, made them into something else, just like you do if you're in your kitchen and you're making dinner and you're combining ingredients together. And we wind up with really incredible, really complex blends that are totally unique and completely almost unrecognizable from what the individual components are. So we are based in Louisville, Kentucky, which is where most bourbon, most of the bourbon in our country is made, in Kentucky, Indiana, and Tennessee. But we don't actually distill. We have a blending lab, and we have a really large warehouse and several bottling lines and all of our blending tanks. And so as we're going through and we're creating these products, what that really means is that a lot of our portfolio is really limited, which Barrell Bourbon has been in Australia now for, I think, about a year. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's been there for about a year. And everything that we make at Barrell Bourbon on the bourbon side of things is limited edition, because we're working with multiple producers for every blend that we work with. We have a network of about 78 different producers that we work with, both nationally and internationally. either for liquid or barrels, depending on what product you're looking at in our portfolio, because we don't only make bourbon, we also make rye, we make rum, we make American whiskey. And so what that means is all of our bourbons are, like I said, limited. We'll release maybe 4 or 5 bourbon batches over the course of every year. There's usually about 15,000 or 18,000 bottles or so in a bourbon batch. And then when it's gone, it's gone. We never reproduce it. We never make it again. We never hold a little bit back to re-release it later. And they're always intentionally super unique from one another. Batch 29 is totally different flavor profile than batch 30, than is batch 31, and so on and so forth. So that's really what we're known for at our company. But, you know, we have a really robust single barrel program because we have such a wide range of people that we can partner with to find, you know, the very best barrels that are available, or the most interesting, the most complex barrels that are available. As we taste through those lots of barrels and decide whether or not we're going to bring them to Kentucky to work with them, we'll often identify barrels that are really exceptional examples of what that particular spirit is that we're tasting at the time. And so I like to liken it to almost being at like a farmer's market, right? If you're shopping for ingredients to make dinner and you're looking, I like food metaphors. This is my second one. I'm just realizing in like 5 minutes. But anyway, if you're at a farmer's market, you're shopping for dinner ingredients and you see like a big pile of tomatoes and you decide you want to make a tomato sauce and you bring all of it home, but then you find like that one totally perfect, like round, plump, juicy tomato. You're like, I'm going to slice this up and I'm just going to eat it on its own. I'm not going to put this in a big batch of tomato sauce. That's kind of what our single barrel program is like. So as we're tasting through these barrels and organizing them by flavor profile and kind of deciding what we want to work with from who, we'll identify barrels that are perfect examples of what we think a bourbon should taste like, for example, in the bourbon program. And that's the barrel that you guys have that you're tasting today. So the single barrel that you all have is our single barrel bourbon Z1I9, which is a 10-year-old Tennessee single barrel bourbon. And then everything, thank you so much. Yeah, I was gonna say the bottle's in Australia because it's a single barrel. Y'all have all of it, but beautiful barrel. And as you guys can see, age stated for 10 years old. And then it's also bottled at cask strength. So the proof on this one is 101.2, which is actually a little bit on the lower end for us at Barrel Craft Spirits. Most of our stuff usually exists in the, I would say 108 to 124 range in our single barrels. So that's a little bit of a lower proof one for us, but we pulled it out because we thought it was like a truly exceptional single barrel bourbon. And by the way, just I know we mentioned earlier, there's some newer kind of drinkers in the audience that are listening in. So cask strength means that we are taking distillate and putting it immediately from the barrel into the bottle. We're not proofing it down with water. So whatever the proof is or the ABV is of the liquid in the barrel is what it will be going into the bottle. So in the case of our single barrel program, that's directly from barrel to bottle. In the case of our batches and our blends, that's from barrel to blending tank to bottle, but we're never adding any water to change the proof. So Z1I9, like I said, a 10-year-old single barrel bourbon from Tennessee, 101.2 proof. This one in particular, I think is just really, really smooth, really, really enjoyable. We get a lot of people who are almost kind of afraid to enter into our realm of like cask strength spirits because they exist at such a high proof. And so I think it's really nice when you can find something that's a little bit lower, at least for us anyway, a little bit lower proof on that end so that they can feel a little bit more comfortable like tasting it and they're not worried about getting blown away by alcohol or, you know, not being able to taste maybe what they think they should taste, which by the way, there's no wrong answer to what you should or shouldn't taste in whiskey. And this particular one has some really nice notes of almost like a graham cracker. There's some honeycomb, there's like lemon cream, and then you get some really interesting classic bourbon notes of caramel and toffee and nutmeg and baking spice. And it has a really kind of rich, concentrated center, almost like a viscous kind of mouthfeel, like on the front and the mid palate, when fades really nicely into those baking spices. And so this is a really, I think, you know, great example of a bourbon drinker's bourbon. This is when you look for bourbon on the shelf, you know the flavor profile of bourbon, you're interested in trying a new bourbon. This is a really great one to go for. And you guys did a great job picking this barrel. I got them to send me, I don't have a bottle of it, but they sent me a 50 ml from the distillery so I could taste it and talk about it with you guys. And I was really blown away by it. I thought it was really good.
Well, thank you for that. We are loving it here down under. When we one of our partner retailers, Awesome Spirits, is the importer distributor for Barrell here in Australia. We sat them down. We said, hey, we want some samples, both bourbons and ryes, and we tried a range of them. And this was the standout bourbon. We were like, immediately, let's grab this one as well. And there was a rye as well that stood out. And David, who makes the financial decisions at the whiskey show here, we I don't know if you want to tell the story, but we said we need to take both a Barrell and a rye, and that's the story of how we came up with 2 exclusive bottlings this year.
I'm okay with it. Listen, as many exclusive bottlings as you guys want, we'll keep sending them to Australia for you. We've got plenty.
I've got a question here for you, Steph. Emma's asking, is the Barrell rye blending a common thing in America? I only know of Widow Jane doing a similar product. Was it more of a historical method or a new idea?
That's a great question. This for us was a newer idea. I think blended bourbon is far more common today than it was 11 years ago when Joe Beatrice, who owns our company, founded our company. But what we actually do with blending is we take it even a step farther. So what a lot of companies are doing and have been doing for a while is they're blending a lot of different like liquids together to create a consistent product. But what we do at our company is that we're working with, like I said, a really wide network of different producers, specifically looking for different ages, different mash bills, different flavor profiles, and then combine them together to create a totally unique product that wouldn't exist on the market otherwise. So it's an idea that we got actually, originally it was happening in Scotland for many hundreds of years, or 150, 200 years, however long it's been going on there, since 1800s. And we decided we wanted to bring it across the pond, if you will, over to the US and apply it to American craft whiskey, because about 11 years ago, when Joe founded the company in 2010, American craft whiskey was in the middle of a meteoric kind of rise. At the time, I was tending bar at a whiskey bar in New York, and we specialized in American whiskey, and there were maybe like 500 or 600 different whiskeys on our back bar. And, we had people coming in asking us all kinds of like really intense, well-educated questions about what those different liquids were and expecting us to know all of it. And so that was a really new thing here in the US. People hadn't really had that level of like depth of knowledge or interest in American whiskey. They had certainly in Scotch for a very long time, but in American whiskey, it wasn't really something that you were seeing. And so Joe kind of noticed this like new, really highly educated, really intelligent, interested consumer in what they were buying. And he realized that as they were looking for things that were a little bit more communicative and transparent about how they were made, they were looking for things that were really, really high quality, also super innovative and unique. They didn't want to be buying things that they had already been purchasing for however many, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, what their parents and grandparents were drinking. And so he sort of picked up on that trend that the consumer was kind of driving, and took a model that already had existed in Scotland and applied it to American spirits in a way that nobody had really done before.
Sorry, I had to hit the mute button. So thanks for the explanation here. Just in the interest of time, let's dive into the Stellum as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
The rye, I think we're trying sample number 10. Here we go.
The rye. So I am actually really excited to be, talking about the rye with you guys, because this is one of my favorite products that we make at our company. So I work for Barrell Craft Spirits, obviously, but Barrell Craft Spirits founded this new brand called Stellam Spirits earlier this spring, around April or so. We launched this new brand called Stellam Spirits. And Stellum is made by the same people who make Barrell. So we're housed in the same facility in Louisville, Kentucky. And we have the same blending team, headed up by Joe Beatrice, who is our founder and CEO. And we work on the same sort of base concept that we have at Barrell, which is that we're making cask strength blends of different whiskeys from different producers in different states of different ages and different flavor profiles. But the sort of two key concepts behind Stellum that differentiate it from Barrell. The first is that we wanted to make something that held sort of true to what we do at our company, but we also wanted to have something that was a little bit more price conscious on the shelf for people. So this is a lot less expensive than Barrell Craft Spirits, not because it's any less of high quality. We won a lot of awards at Stellum, but because we're working with barrels that we've been working with for many, many years now. So we had a really wide range to work with when we were creating Stellum. And on that note, we blend Stellum to taste, as opposed to at Barrell Craft Spirits, where everything that we make on the bourbon and the rye side is a limited edition batch blend that's only made once and never reproduced. We had an eye with Stellum to create something that was meant to be a consistent product, your go-to bottle that you kind of, every time you picked it up, it tasted exactly the same as the first time that you tried it, wherever that was, in Australia or in Denver, Colorado, or in Louisville, Kentucky, or wherever else it's being sold. And so it, like I said, it holds really true to the ethos of what we do, which is cask strength blends. But it takes that a step farther, and blending, we're working on blending to taste with Stellum, as opposed to blending to create something totally unique, which is in and of itself almost more difficult when you're working with that many different producers. The Stellam Rye is a blend of ryes between 4 and 10 years old from Kentucky, Indiana, and Tennessee. And we're working with primarily 95% rye, 5% malt barley mash bill rye that's coming out of MGP in Indiana. But then on top of that, we're layering other ryes that are a little bit more barley forward from Kentucky and Tennessee, and that are a little bit older, so they have different flavor profiles. There's different notes coming out of them on top of that primary ingredient of MGP rye to kind of enhance it, make it a little bit more complex, and make it taste a little, a lot more different than any, rye mash bill that you would normally get from a larger, producer. And so what that means for this rye is, I don't think that this rye tastes like American rye. Like rye is actually my favorite. I far prefer rye to bourbon on any given day, which is slightly inconvenient working for a company that makes primarily bourbon. But it means that I'm really excited every time that we have a new rye product. And I think that, American rye is really characterized by super aggressive spice notes primarily. You get a lot of like cinnamon, there's a lot of black pepper, there's a lot of clove and like star anise, and really assertive aggressive spice flavors with a really sort of high spice, kind of alcohol content that almost really washes out and dries out your palate quite a bit. And so there are a lot of people who say that they don't like American rye because they're used to that particular flavor profile. But this Stellam Rye, since we're working with 6 years worth of rye from 3 different producers, it really has a lot more of a complex sort of depth to it. I get a lot when I drink Stellam Rye, I get a lot of orange peel. There's a lot of like tangerine notes, quite a bit of lemon. So you do get that same kind of spice level, but it's presented as a citrus spice, or like a citric acid, as opposed to a really aggressive baking spice. And then on top of that, it has a really nice, well-rounded mouthfeel. This has a lot of like clover honey. It's got a lot of like apple peel, caramel apple kind of things happening to it that almost fades into like a really bright, fresh orchard fruit, like green apple kind of note. And it all finishes off with really interesting herbaceous notes, lots of spearmint, fresh mint. It almost reminds me on the finish, especially if you add a few drops of water to it, of like a really great like mint julep, truly. And so I think this is a really versatile whiskey, and it's really fun to drink, especially if you think you're turned off by American rye. I would encourage you to try this one.
I love this comment. I was actually going to comment that this is the highest ABV whiskey we have in the tasting kits today at 58.12%. And as a Dr. Packer Dynamite, he's a local mate of mine, but that's his Facebook name there. He rightly so says it's incredibly smooth and a unique profile, very citrusy. It's incredibly fresh for me, and it's drinkable even at that really high ABV. I just wanted to call it out. It's dangerously sessionable.
People bring up our ABV and our proof all the time, being cask strength. This is not something I would recommend having like 10 shots of. Not that I would recommend that for any any liquor, but definitely not something that you want to be like railing kind of all night. But I will say there's a reason we do everything at cask strength, and that's because when we taste the barrels that we're working with to create these blends, we taste them at cask strength. We taste them directly out of the barrel. We don't dilute anything down. We're looking at what the flavor profile presents itself straight from the barrel onto the palate. And so we wouldn't be holding true to the flavors that we were noticing when we tasted these barrels and decided to buy them and bring them to Kentucky to turn into our blends if we manipulated them by adding water and changing the proof, because that would also change the flavor profile. So we really want you, the consumer, to have the same experience that we had when we tasted these at cask strength straight out of the barrel. We want you to notice all of those flavors that we noticed when we selected these whiskeys to create these blends. That's why we do that.
As you've been talking, just been promoting some of the feedback that's coming through on the socials. As you can see, people are really enjoying the rye here. I've got a question here. Does a blending house have a house style depending on a blending team?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think, certainly the answer to it depends on the blending team. There are definitely some really strong personalities on our blending team, and they all like different things. I think if you were to ask, we have 3 people on our blending team primarily. There's Joe Beatrice, who I mentioned before owns the company. His right-hand man, Trip Stimson, who's I think his official title on his business card is like Chief Whiskey Scientist, but he's Joe's right-hand guy. And then we have a woman named Nick Christensen, who's our assistant blender and single barrel program director. And if you were to ask Trip that question, he would say that his style is Mountain Dew because he really likes like that kind of like really aggressive, like citrus kind of flavor. And I think he likes things that you wouldn't expect like a master blender to like. Joe is a really big fan of like spice and honey. And then Nick comes from a cocktail background. And so she really, when she's tasting things, she really looks at, oh, sorry, I got distracted with the comment on the bottom. The answer is yes, and I'll talk about that in a sec. Nick really likes flavor profiles that will work really well in cocktails because she's always constantly thinking about the consumer at home if they want to drink it without, not necessarily straight, but also with an ice cube or they want to mix it into a drink. So she's looking for notes that'll exhibit that a little bit more. And I know that they've had some pretty heated conversations in Kentucky as they were deciding what they're going to come out with and when the blend was finished, which is also a totally different conversation because you never quite know when you're done, right? If you have 3 people that always have these different flavor profiles. But we do make a lot of things at our distillery, and I do think some of them highlight each blender's kind of individuality a little bit more than the other, depending on what you're looking at.
That's awesome. I'm just conscious of time because we're almost out of time for our first hour session when we'll switch over to the next brand. But a question to all 3 of you. As Australian whiskey lovers here, and we love all styles of whiskey, whether it's Australian or Scotch or Japanese, we've noticed there is a growing trend towards more American, styles of bourbon, ryes, even the single malts coming down under. Is there any highlights or exciting news from each of your distilleries that we can talk about or share with the whiskey lovers down under that we can look forward to from each of yours? I might, Christian, you might kick off.
We've been you're going to see a lot more of our products down there. Also in that kit, like I said, is some experiments around more of a deep dive into beer. So much of American single malt is sort of driven by the craft brewing industry that we've really, we're bringing a lot of craft brewing techniques and craft brewing ethos into what we do. So it's different yeast strains. We have played around with different, saison strains or like sourdough or English ale strains. So much of the flavor of a beer and subsequent whiskey comes from the ester development in the metabolic activity of the yeast that for us, that's where we play the most. And then also some innovative finishes using the wine and brewing industry around us. So keeping it local.
I love it. And in a couple of weeks' time, there might be another single cask Westward landing down under. I've heard a little rumor here. So with obviously you have a huge tied background with the local stout industry.
Yep.
We'll hopefully hear about that one in the coming weeks for Australian whiskey lovers to talk about that. Dave, what's new in Reservoir? What can we look forward to down under?
I think probably you talk about do different blending groups have like a consistent profile, things like that. I think one of the fun things we might do, going back to the fact that you guys have 100% wheat, 100% rye, and 100% corn bourbon. That I think what we might do is possibly have the Australian market take all three of those and see if they can't come up with a blend that the market itself can actually agree on. That's the best one. And, come up with its own special blend that we have the whiskey list put out in Australia. And it'd be only available there, nowhere else. So Virginia's own Australian. I don't know. I think I got to come up with a better name than that. Like Old Dominion down under. Yeah.
We'll send it to the marketing team, but we'll definitely come up. Well, one of the things we do love is we've actually run competitions where people can design their own label and pick the name of their whiskey. So yeah, maybe that's something we can do.
How about its own mash bill too?
Exactly. There's plenty to do.
I love it when the market decides, because remember, what's the one point? Does it taste good? Do you want another? That's it.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Dave. And Steph, anything to look forward to down under for Aussie whiskey lovers, both from Stellum and Barrell, apart from these two awesome exclusives that have just landed?
Yeah, absolutely. We have 5, I want to say, new releases from Barrell that are going to be coming to Australia. We have 2 kind of ultra premium lines that are going to be down there for the first time, I believe. We have our gray label line and our brand new, not just to Australia, but also to the US, our gold label line. So our gray label line consists of gray label bourbon, gray label whiskey, and then gray label seagrass. So for anybody who's familiar with our gray label bourbon, it's been around for a few years now. In 2018, it was named Best Whiskey in America by Fred Minnick. But that's always a blend of bourbons between 15 and 17 years old from Kentucky, Indiana, and Tennessee, and it's bottled at cask strength. So the 4th bottling of that will be out this year. In addition, the BCS Gray Label whiskey, we made it once in 2018. We took 3 years off. We're re-releasing it again this year in a new bottling. 2018's release was a blend of 25-year-old whiskeys from Indiana, bottled at cask strength. This year's release is a blend of 24-year-old Canadian whiskeys that we finished separately in Armagnac and Oloroso sherry casks and bottled at cask strength, about 124 proof. And then for those of you who are familiar with our Barrell Seagrass, which is our blend of Canadian and American ryes finished in rum agricole Madeira and apricot brandy barrels, we are doing a super highly allocated BCS Gray Label Seagrass, which is a 16-year Canadian rye blend of some of our oldest and rarest Canadian rye stocks, given the same 3 finishes that we have on Seagrass, which is that Madeira, apricot brandy, and rum agricole, and that's going to come in at about 131 proof. And then on top of that, our brand new ultra premium line, BCS Gold Label. So we'll be launching BCS Gold Label Bourbon. So that'll be super allocated as well, but it should be there within the next few months or so. That's a blend of bourbons, a minimum of 16 years old from Kentucky, Indiana, and Tennessee, with one component that has been aged for about 2 years in toasted American oak barrels that we constructed from 4 totally unique different lots of barrels that had different flavor profiles. And of course, cask strength as well. I believe the proof on that is somewhere in like 114, 115 off the top of my head.
Wow, there's a lot of stuff coming down under. I love it. We are going to be spoiled for choice. I love it.
That's our goal. We just want to always have new, exciting things for everybody to try and really something for everybody, which is great.
Well, amazing. Well, thank you so much to all 3 of you. Stephanie Bear from Barrell Stellum. We've got Dave, Reservoir Distillery founder and master distiller there, and Christian Krogstad, who's also the founder and master distiller of Westward. Thank you to all 3 of you, and we'll see you at the next virtual tasting.
Thanks, and
Thanks, everybody.
Kind of upset that we didn't get tasting kits too.
Yeah, no doubt. I want to drink all this stuff. Cheers, guys. Thanks.
We're going to put that in the contract next time.
We will, in future, we definitely want to get kits out to everyone.
Sure.
Thanks, everyone. So I will just start switching people over. There we go. Just before we promote the next lot, I just want to recap for everyone who's sort of joined. Today, don't forget to rate all 18 whiskies in your kits. You've got 2 weeks to do it, but if you rate all 18 whiskies inside the app. Let me just put the app up on screen. Very easy rating system. Click on the bottle, give it your heart rating of 1 of 5. Once you've done all 18, you automatically go into the running to win one of the Whiskey Show exclusive bottlings, and that's them on screen there if you want to have a look at them. So that's that. Let me just welcome. Sorry, too many buttons to press. Got another Dave, Linus, and just them. All right, welcome guys. This is the second hour of the virtual USA Whiskey Show, and we've got today Linus Shucksman from I've had a complete mind blank. Woodford. I was going to say Brown Foreman, but that's we were talking about.
That still works.
You've had a few bourbons, mate. It makes sense.
I've had quite a few, and we started early today as well. We've got Tristan Finney, who's representing Wild Turkey today, and we've got David Denton from Iconic Beverages, who's the national distributor for both Whistlepig and Balcones. So, gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers for having us.
All right. Well, just to remind everyone from home, so this is we're going to spend the next hour talking about those 4 brands as well. So I might kick off with Linus. Do you want to talk us through the Cherrywood?
Yeah, sure. Just before we dive into Cherrywood, it smells amazing, by the way. Just chat about who we are. Obviously, we're Woodford Reserve. We're owned by a family company called Brown Foreman, owned by the Browns still, and they created a brand called Old Forester in 1870. The first bottled bourbon, and it was made before, during, and after Prohibition. It's still made today. It's the longest continuously made bourbon. We've got a smaller boutique distillery in Tennessee called Jack Daniels, you might have heard of as well. And then obviously in the 1990s, we bought back a distillery called the Old Oscar Pepper Distillery and created a brand called Woodford Reserve. And it's quite serendipitous that we're actually chatting about Woodford Reserve today, because literally 2 days ago was our 25th anniversary of opening the doors, which is pretty cool. And we had an idea there that which now is commonplace, and there are some amazing whiskies out there, to use a small batch handcrafted premium old style bourbon, which then at that time was kind of out of vogue, and now quite happily is in vogue. And we're using old wooden fermentation tanks, using small pot stills in our distillation process. And we've got 3 climate controlled barrel aging warehouses. So yeah, it's a pretty cool place, and if you're in that part of the world, please check it out. It's really, really cool. Chatting about what we're doing today, Chris Morris, our master distiller, wanted Woodford Reserve to be the home of innovation when it came to American whiskey, and ever since 2005, we've got a thing called the Masters Collection. Now you can see behind me, I'm a bit of a collector in my spare time. I could pay me, Woodford Reserve, and every year we do a one-off expression of Woodford Reserve, and we'll change probably one aspect, whether the mash bill or the barrel or a finish or one quirky different thing, and make about 10,000 bottles a year. When it's gone, and it's kind of a cult status now. And in your packs, you have 2 of the Woodford Masters Collection. You have the most recent one, number 16, the Woodford Reserve Old Fine and Rare, which is actually a blend of Woodford 17-year-old down to obviously 7-8-year-old whiskies as well. And you never get a Woodford Reserve that old, and it's beautiful, rich cacao and wood and spice. And when you try it, it will knock your socks off, 45.2%. But what we're trying today is something a little bit different. This is actually back from 2017, and this is the smoked cherry wood. And we thought we'd try this one because it was just so quirky and so different and so out there, and it might be tapping into a trend I think you might see moving forward in American whiskey, which is kind of smoking their whiskies. So this is the Woodford Reserve Cherry Wood Smoked Barley. We've changed our mash bill, which is kind of cool for this one. Normally Woodford Reserve is 72% corn, 18% rye, and 10% malted barley, quite spicy on the back palate. And we knew because we were smoking, we'd have to take that rye out. So it's 70% corn, 30% malted barley. And what we've done, we've dried the barley using cherry smoke. So we've got local cherry trees that are sustainable. We gave them to the maltsters. They burnt it down, made a charcoal, then used that to actually dry our cherry woods. And it's kind of a unique, quirky, different, off-the-wall sort of whiskey, which I think you'll really going to enjoy and like. So let's give it a taste, guys. So obviously, beautiful colour, 45.2% ABV. If you're trying it at home, give it a smell. And on the nose, it really is. It's got a Woodford DNA, but it's just beautiful, like rich cherry jam, spice, and yeah, kind of like I do a lot of barbecuing, and I use cherry sometimes in my barbecuing, and unsurprised, maybe it's psychosomatic, but I'm definitely getting cherry on the nose. Let's give it a taste, shall we? Really interesting. It hits that mid palate, then cherry, wood, lots like nuttiness, like almond notes, marzipan. At the back, you get this bit of spice on the back palate, which again is really weird because there's absolutely no rye in this. But that spice is from the pot distillation and from that cherry wood smoke as well. So really interesting, really different, super tasty. Yeah, marzipan, nutty notes, like cherry ripe, which is super kind of cool. Just really out there and different and super quirky. And obviously Chris Morris, the master distiller, he's always looking back to look forward. And I asked him the inspiration around this, and he said, well, when he was researching Woodford Reserve, obviously it's in Versailles, Kentucky. This is 1812, but there was a nearby maltsters, and they did all like the malting for the local distilleries, and that just gave this idea to go away and then say, well, how can we just affect that malting process, and what can we do? And then obviously being inspired by those local cherry trees was like, that was the inspiration behind it. So really different. I feel bad for Tristan and Dave because you haven't got a jam in front of you, but it's super tasty. Obviously in the pack size, I'm not too sure. It's number 17 in the pack. I did buy a pack, guys. I did support you guys. Can you feel the love? Yeah, it's number 17 in the tasting pack, and the Woodford Reserve Old, Fine and Rare is number 18 in the tasting pack. But I did session with Ollie recently, like innovation and what's going to happen in American whiskey, and I think we were saying, listen, gut instinct and just looking at trends. We think smoking might be a trend that you see happening in American whiskey, and I see David just nodding his head there. I think you might see some more smoked whiskeys trying different ideas, and we just thought this was a really interesting one just to highlight in this whiskey show, just to show you how diverse whiskey, like American whiskey, can truly be, and how like things like, you know, putting in a cherry smoke and these beautiful spice notes you wouldn't think you'd find a whiskey that had no rye in the actual mash bill.
Linus, do you have a bottle in front of you? I can just highlight on screen.
Yeah. So that's the Woodford Reserve smoked cherry wood barley. That's from 2017. There's not much. I think you might have a few in your shop. If you have, obviously snap them up because when it's gone, it's gone. Just show you the Woodford Reserve Old, Fine and Rare. We have changed the bottle, which is kind of cool. So that's the new Schmidt packaging for the Woodford Reserve Old, Fine and Rare. So that's how the bottles will look moving forward in the Masters collection. Just talking about the old bottle, this was based on our pot still. So we have 3 pot stills when we make Woodford Reserve. We have a 9,000 and 2 6,000 litre stills. That's just the same shape as our pot stills. Made by A Forsyth in Scotland, one of the 2 remaining still makers in Scotland. So we really went that whole old style Scotch making idea. Yeah.
We're getting some comments in, Linus. First one here from Facebook user. I don't know your name, sorry, but apologies. Love this, dark sugars, blackberry, jammy notes with hints of smoke.
Yeah, and listen, it's not like, you know, obviously the Isle whiskey where they're using like that peat and that maritime smoke, and it's all like burnt rubber and beautiful medicinal flavors, like becatine flavors, which we all love. This is that elegant wood smoke, cherry smoke. So yes, it's influenced in there, but it's like I describe it like, you know, having like if I was to be barbecuing with cherry wood and I stepped away and smelt my clothes, you'd smell that sense of that cherry wood smoke on your clothes rather than that direct full-on smoke. So it's just quirky. It's out there. Will we do it again? Who knows? Chris Morris is a man of mystery. He keeps his cards close to his chest. I know they put down a brand new whiskey yesterday. They told us that, and they wouldn't tell us what it was, which is just wildly frustrating. Before I hand over to the guys, I will touch on very quick. Just I know we had to about mass selection. our core brand is pretty cool. We do have four whiskies, and as you know, when they repealed Prohibition, they put down really four loose definition of what was a straight American whiskey, and that was obviously 51% corn, rye, malted barley, and wheat. And we have one of all. We have our Woodford Reserve, our regular Woodford Reserve, which is the bourbon. We have our Woodford Reserve rye, our Woodford Reserve malt, which is out, and then hopefully, some stage in the near future, we'll have the Woodford Reserve wheat. COVID has not been kind to anyone trying to get whiskey into this country, unfortunately. So as I'm sure the guy on the screen running their heads away. So yeah, really quirky and different and out there. We just want to try this one because each one is different and they are trying different things. We do have one more thing, and frustratingly, we can't get it here in Australia. We have our little half bottles. No, yes, it's a great question. So we're using the wood smoke to dry the malt. Yeah, great question. I
was actually going to ask that same question too. Thanks, Cascode on YouTube for asking that one.
And that's how you're really infusing that cherry wood flavour into the actual malt. If you did it afterwards, it'd be much more of like a sense of it. It wouldn't be quite as wouldn't be quite as not strong. Wouldn't be quite as apparent. Yeah, just one more thing. Oh,
Ian's asking. Sorry, the questions are coming in hot, Linus. We've got to get to the users. But Ian asks, did you use a different barrel type to complement the different spirit?
It's a great call. And we have tried different barrels. We've tried brandy barrels, red wine barrels. We've tried different chars, different toasts. But in this particular one, we are using the regular Woodford Reserve barrel. Just to say, obviously, we're owned by Jack Daniels. They have their own cooperages. Our barrels are different from the Jack barrels. We do char the heads of our barrels and toast them as well to get more of those vanillins. But it's the regular barrel that we use. But we have used, the American oak we use Ozark oak. We're trying different ideas, but in this particular case, we're just using the regular Woodford Reserve barrels. But a great question. Love those questions, man.
So for me, I get it savory nose, but sweetness on the palate, and it's like a savory cherry ripe. Or barbecuing a cherry ripe might be the perfect tasting note for me, but this is delicious.
Sorry, I've got my son right here just trying to do it. Please go away. You can't. They want to go away. Sorry, guys. My apologies. This is more like my son picks the man where I'll just say yes to get rid of him, just to get what he wants. Kids are so clever, they really are. Hey, it's a great call out. You're right. There is sweet notes there. There are like confectionery notes. There are wood notes, but that savoury note, I love that call out. That's why we're friends. That's a great call out. It's just interesting and quirky. It's the whiskey that when you go back in to try it again, you get different layers of flavours and different ideas and different thoughts. The whiskey I sort of sit there and I've got 3-page notes on this. I write notes on all my whiskies. I sit there, I try 10 every night for a few nights and just keep writing different notes. And I love that savoury call out.
My most favorite thing about this whiskey actually is we highlighted at the beginning of the stream. This is our 9th virtual whiskey show, but our very first one in April 2020 when the pandemic started down under. I did my very first live virtual stream with Chris Morris like that. There was no to get someone of his caliber to interview with and to spend an entire hour with him alone just talking and he highlighted that the cherry wood was starting to come. And now we've got it in our kits today. It's nice to actually see that because we didn't have it last time. So that journey continuing, and this is why people keep coming back to David's whiskey shows, whether it's the physical ones in Sydney and Melbourne or our virtual ones that we do. Is whiskeys that we talk about online. You will hopefully see in future years. Coming down under. So something very special for me to try actually.
I'll throw it out there too. Obviously, this isn't a sales pitch because this always sells out, but there's not much around. So I think there's a few bottles on your store. I might buy myself. I've only got 2, but when it's gone, it's gone. So we had this hidden away, and thanks to COVID, we had a few cases. So we managed to get for you guys. Otherwise, it would have been gone. And obviously, the final res, the brand new one. I don't know what's next year. Chris won't tell us. So.
We'll get it on the next virtual one for sure. But I might hand over to David Denton, who's representing both Balcones and Whistlepig. David, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah, we can hear you fine, mate. Thank you.
Perfect.
What do we want to do? Let's do the Whistlepig 12-year-old first from you.
Yeah, we want to jump into Whistlepig straight away. Okay, cool. So yeah, the Whistlepig brand is a brand we picked up in national distribution a little while ago. Both brands have got a pretty sort of similar history timeline. They're reasonably new in the scheme of things. They're not a 200-year-old bourbon or rye company, that's for sure. But yeah, Whistlepig's based up in Vermont, which is pretty much as north as you can get in America without it being called Canada. Funnily enough, they do use Canadian distillate in a lot of their sort of SKUs, particularly the 10 and the 12, which we're going to be trying today, and they're very transparent of that. So they were originally an NPD or a non-distillate producing distillery, but they're slowly getting towards what they'd like to call triple terroir. So they want to grow their own rye grain. They want to use their own distillate with their own still and their own oak. So they actually have a 500-acre farm up there, which was an old, 150-year-old dairy farm. So back in 2007, one of the founding partners purchased the land with the idea of making his own whiskey eventually. And then in 2008, David Pickerell, the late great David Pickerell, came on board and headed the team in, sourcing some whiskey to start getting that revenue coming in. And they went up to Alberta in Canada, the ADL, Alberta Distillers Limited, and they tried sampling some stock that was already aged. So they sampled some stuff that was already 10 years old up there, and they asked what they were going to do with that liquid. And they said, oh, this is going to be just for blending. It could go into any number of any sort of Canadian style whiskies. And David Pickerell and his team sort of thought, well, we actually think it's good enough to bottle. So they took that stock back across the border and started packaging it in the 10-year-old. And similarly with the 12-year-old, which we're going to try now. So the 12-year-old is what I like to call an old world rye whiskey. So it's a minimum 12-year-old rye whiskey aged in new American charred oak and then finished in different barrels. So we've got port pipe, French Sauterne, and Madeira, which sort of lend it a lot more sort of intricate spices and a more sort of layered flavor profile, which is really interesting. So we're going to jump into that one, which I don't actually have a glass ready for this one, but bottled at 43%, so 86 proof. A lot of their whiskies, I know the 10-year-old is 100 proof.
Sorry, I realized you wanted to talk about Balcones first, so I switched it up for you. Sorry.
That's all right. No, that's completely fine. I've got everything here ready. But so the 12-year-old for me, it's not your typical rye whiskey. When you think of rye whiskeys, a lot of rye whiskeys I base off, funnily enough, one of our other portfolio whiskeys is a Rittenhouse Rye, which is like a really staple rye whiskey, and it's kind of the benchmark of what you expect a rye whiskey to be. They're quite spicy, they're dry. It was actually America's first whiskey, if you want to get really technical, because rye was growing in that sort of northern belt before they established corn a little bit further south. But rye is generally quite spicy. They're using, the Madeira, the port, and the Sauterne cask to kind of mellow out that spiciness, give it a little bit more sort of structure. For me, a lot of sort of dates, raisins, lots of Christmas cake spice. I described this one as sort of Christmas cake pudding or brandied Christmas cake pudding in a bottle. Quite dry, a little bit of chocolate and butterscotch in there.
It's super drinkable. At the ABV bottled at 12 years old, it's incredibly approachable as a rye whiskey.
Yeah, funnily enough, rye is one of those grains where it's notoriously difficult to distill and then age. It can turn in the barrel quite quickly. So the higher the age statement on a rye whiskey sort of can command quite considerable price increases. There's not a lot of other rye whiskies on the market. I mean, Michter's have got a beautiful range of rye whiskies. Pappy Van Winkle's, they all command some pretty top dollar marks. So we're very lucky to have a 12-year-old rye whiskey like this in Australia at its price point. So yeah, very accessible.
Awesome. Just checking if there's any comments from home.
Sorry, I've got a question for Dave. So is it 100% rye mash bill?
So they're using it's got a bit of a convoluted history. So originally they were using 100% Alberta rye whiskey, which in their mash bill at that one particular distillery, they use 100% rye in the mash bill that's unmalted, and they actually have their own unique enzyme process that actually breaks that down, converts it into sort of sugars that the yeast can consume. So there's a bit of a lineage or generational type jump. So originally they were buying 10-year-old stock and they were packaging it in America. Then they started buying 5-year-old stock, taking it over in a big tanker, aging it for another 5 years in a second new oak barrel at a heavier char. And at the moment, this one is a 90% rye mash bill, the one we're tasting today. So the other 10%, they actually haven't told me what's in it, the other 10%, but for this one and including the 10-year-old, we're going to try, they're both 90% rye mash bill.
That was a great question, Linus. I've got one from Ian from YouTube here. For a rye with a higher age point, does it go into the barrel at a different entry proof?
That's a very good question. They haven't told me those facts just yet. So I will have to follow. That's a very good question. I'll have to follow that one up.
Awesome. I'll save it and I'll drop you an email afterwards so we can...
Perfect.
Yeah, we'll publish it somewhere on our website at some point, Ian. But yeah, thanks for the question of the day. Ian, hit me up because we didn't have an answer for you. I'll drop you a special sample as well for, getting a question that couldn't be answered on the live stream.
That's a good one.
Awesome. Do you want to walk us through the Balcones as well? I've lost my note. I forgot which one we agreed that we're going to talk through.
Well, we've got two to choose from. So we've got the pot still bourbon or the single barrel single malt. I think the single barrel, I mean, they're both, I could talk for hours for both of them, but I don't know, up to you.
Which one's your favorite?
Or for the limited release sort of side of things, I think the French oak single barrel is probably a little bit more talkable.
Yeah, let's talk about that one.
So yeah, okay. Well, Balcones is very similar to Whistlepig. Their sort of lineage starts in that sort of 2007, 2008 range, at opposite ends of the country as well. So, up in Vermont, the temperature or the climate's quite cool, being near the border of Canada and whatnot. But in Texas, they do things a little bit differently, a little bit bigger, I should say. So, both in, size and temperature. So Balcones started out in sort of about 2007, 2008, very, very small operation, all hand-built copper pot stills. And they were actually the first licensed whiskey distillery to produce whiskey in Texas, the state of Texas, since Prohibition. So, which was pretty phenomenal considering, they finished in 1933, and then fast forward to I think 2010, they released their first whiskey, and sort of been building up from 2008. But their primary focus was to recreate a single malt whiskey in an American style or an American fashion. So American single malts are really sort of big hot topic at the moment. It's one of the fastest growing categories over there in the States. And I think the previous guys kind of touched on the fact that it's a little bit cowboy country. There's no appellation law set in place there to really define what it can be. So like with the rye we tried before, has to be minimum 51% rye in the mash bill, new oak, blah, blah, blah. So the single malt category is really, really interesting at the moment. And, Balcones are at that forefront with the Westwards and the Westlands and things like that. But the French oak that we're trying today, each year, to give a bit of sort of background, their single malt that they make, their classic #1 Texas single malt, is 100% malted barley from Scotland, called Golden Promise malted barley, which Macallan used to use and quite a few other people up and it really hit their flavor profile that they enjoyed. And it's the only grain that they actually import. They're very, very sort of grain to glass and local produce focused. So the 4-grain mash bill bourbon is all Texas, apart from the malted barley that's in there. But they import over malted barley, double copper pot distillation, 4-size stills. They actually have the tallest stills in the world at the moment. They're up to 4-story. The line arm itself is nearly 30 to 40 feet tall. And they have a sort of a coiled line arm opposed to a sort of swan neck, which gives it a really big amount of reflux and copper contact. So they're big, robust, oily, heavy style whiskies. And yeah, double pot distillation. And then they're actually used in the classic number one, which we're not trying today, is new and used French oak, new and used Hungarian oak, and new and used American oak. So each year they break down, they give you a component of each. So they'll go an American single malt or single cask, or a French oak or a Hungarian oak. And today we're going to be trying the French oak, which is bottled exclusively here for us in Australia at 53%, which is pretty special in itself. But
have I got the correct specs? That's the ones that were sent to me. I just found them in an email, so I've put them up on screen, but hopefully that's correct.
Barrel number, yes. Yep, 2017. Yeah, that's the one. So, yeah, we're very, very lucky to have, a single barrel of any sort of nature from them. We do get some exclusive stuff sent over from time to time. But yeah, this one was bottled exclusively for us in Australia. And it's interesting to try this side by side with the classic number one. If anybody's ever got any at home or can go out and get some, they're very, very different whiskeys. So this only makes up a very small component of the classic number one single malt. For me, it's very sort of, in comparison to the American one, very dry, a lot more sort of cognac, armagnac, or brandy-esque flavor profiles coming from that sort of tannic-rich French oak. So what's that one there? That one looks like that's the single barrel there. Yep. I'll have a gold wax seal on top, and then the red seal is the classic one, which is a blend of the three different oak species. But yeah, this is the French oak, which we're lucky to have. They usually release these at cask strength annually. We had ours ordered down a little bit, not too much, about 10 points. Their cask strength kind of wavers between 61 and I think 66. So quite spicy there in Texas, and their evaporation rate or angel share is up to 20%. So the liquid doesn't really need to sit in a barrel for too long for it to develop some good characteristics. So
my favorite thing about this whiskey is you can instantly taste the French oak influence in the cask. It just comes straight to the front.
Yeah, for me, I got a lot of that sort of green apple tannic quality that you find in a French oak. Very drying, quite spicy. I don't know. I mean, I'd enjoy this at cask strength. So don't get me wrong, but I'd have to water it down quite a bit, because even at 53, it's a spicy meatball. So yeah, I hope you enjoy that one. I don't know what number it is in the kit, but
number 2.
Number 2. There we go.
And we got a question from Facebook. In Texas, are age statements misleading due to temperature fluctuations?
That's a good question. So yeah, a lot of people are really sort of hung up on the numbers game. They want a 12-year-old whiskey, a 10-year-old whiskey, a 20-year-old whiskey. You know what? Whiskey's ready when it's ready. There is a little bit of a debate of, it needs time to mature in the barrel and, sort of settle out some of those more aggressive, alcohol compounds and whatnot. But in Texas, it has such a, unique climate that their temperature swings are so wild. In 1 year, it's the equivalent of sort of 5 or 6 years in Scotland. So it does, I guess it can hyper mature in those sort of climates. But yeah, look, I mean, whiskey's ready when it's ready. If it tastes like it's ready, it could be 10 years old, it could be 5 years old. They do have, some older whiskeys. The bourbon is a straight bourbon, so it needs to be a minimum 2 to 4 year old whiskey there. So if you want an age statement, that's as close to an age statement as you're probably going to get out of Balcones, because from season to season, their climate just changes so rapidly. They've got to be on top of their barrel program and tasting those whiskeys really regularly just to hit that sweet spot. So it's all about flavor profile. They don't care about time.
I love the fact that it. In America, they hate the word aging. They prefer the word matured. So to your point, pretty much ready. Sorry, I'm after you.
No, it's a great point. And yeah, look, aging came about because there was too many blends on the market. So, marketers in Scotland decided let's put an age statement on it, and it's kind of come full circle. But it comes down to the quality of the spirit in the bottle and whether you enjoy the taste. And we are so lucky to get Texas whiskey down under now.
That's it. It's been quite a long time coming. I mean, the bourbon, which we're not going to try in this sort of session, but it's in the kit, was released 2 years ago. So, the market over there for the craft American sort of single malt and bourbons is so high that we unfortunately have to wait a little while until they can produce a bit more spirit for us. So anything we get is, we're very fortunate to get over here. That's for sure.
No, awesome. And just before we jump over to Wild Turkey, I just want to highlight, if you do download the app, all the distillers and these wonderful gentlemen here have actually uploaded videos inside the app. Let me just show you again. Download the app, the Whiskey List app. Click on the Whiskey USA Virtual Show. Go in. All the bottles are there, all the information. Click on the bottle, but there's also a link to watch a video. And I just wanted to highlight, obviously, rate and buy directly from the app as well. But the Whistlepig videos all start with a pig at the beginning of the interview. It's really fun watching. So jump in and watch those videos. But all the videos are good, top quality. Lots of information about the distillery and each whiskey that we're trying today. So thank you, Dave, for walking us through those two brands. I might hand over to Tristan. Wild Turkey, mate. Welcome.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. How are we all doing today?
Yeah, good. Walk us through a little bit about the distillery, and we are talking about the single barrel today, the Kentucky Spirit.
Really, really stoked to be able to talk about that specific release, because it's something that's very close to the heart of Jimmy Russell, our head master distiller. When we talk about the history of Wild Turkey, it does have a distilling history dating back to the 1860s. So we have had a lot of progression, a lot of changes, bunch of ownerships through there. But when we actually say the Wild Turkey brand, it started out similar to some of the other counterparts we've talked about today, where it didn't actually have a home. It started off as a brand for a grocer supermarket chain that got into booze in the early 1900s. And after a hunting trip and tasting this delicious liquid that we call the Wild Turkey 101 today, a brand was born and inspired from our little, at that time, a nice little distillery in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, where we still are today. And we're 2 generations of the Russell family. Jimmy, who joined us in 1954, and if you haven't heard his name, it's going to be a little bit surprising for most, but he is the longest serving master distiller in any spirits discipline. You can call him the Buddha of bourbon. He's literally, has also been called the master distiller's master distiller. He's an incredibly, almost spiritual moment when you hear that man talk, not even just about his own bourbon, just about the way of life in Kentucky. And he was joined in 1981 by his son, Eddie, who is a genuine inspiration for myself and so many other people around the world, because he's just honest, he wants to have fun, and he also wants to see what our juice can do at Wild Turkey. Now, everything that's been done, we've been doing it since before Prohibition was around. Jimmy's the only master distiller alive today, still active as well to a small extent, that was actually educated and tutored by somebody who was distilling before Prohibition. So he has all this wisdom and all this idea of how he brings our bourbon to life in the same way that it came even before Wild Turkey itself was a brand. Now, when we're producing our things, we've talked about different stills from other people and all this. We are traditional almost to a T. We have one mash bill for all of our bourbons and one for rye. We have one yeast strain we use for both of those, which is the only living thing at the distillery that predates Jimmy. That's been there since the early 1950s, a few years before he turned up. Our still, we only run one type of column still through there as well, and it's massive. It's 52 feet high, 6 feet long, 19 plates through there as well. And then we've got a little doubler there, a little pot still just to rectify it as well. But one thing about Wild Turkey that is incredibly important to understand is that we have always done this idea of low-proof distillation. We don't take it to those legal maximums and minimums. And I know in the group before, there were some discussions around some of the legalities here and there for it. But, we're only distilling to about 128 to 129 proof. Putting it into barrel at 115, which we changed in 2006, having a long generation of barrel entry proof at 107 up until 2004. But we always believe that we allow the magic of the barrels to really speak through with what's happening. We don't want to sit there and proof it down too far to make our signature 101. So when we're going into barrel at 115, depending on where you are. And those rick houses and those warehouses are the 32 of them we have across our main campus, our Fort Nelson. And if anyone's been to Lawrenceburg and had the pleasure of going past the Four Roses Distillery, there's 4 very old warehouses there that belong to us in the old McBrayer site. But we allow the kind of warehouses to speak for themselves in that regard. But when we're making our signature 101, we're getting all of this, high rye, low proof distillation style spirit and mingling it all back together, getting lots of expressions from, 6 to 8 years old in for that specific release. And we bring that all together. Now, in 1994, Jimmy had the idea of bringing a single barrel expression to our Wild Turkey 101. And that was the birth of Kentucky Spirit. Now, that specific release was still at 8 years old because that's what the age statement was on the 101 day-to-day there. The only place you can still find an 8-year-old 101 is in Japan. So if you're lucky enough to get some or still have some kicking around from the 90s, let me know because I will definitely take it off your hands. But in reality, what he started to do was take all these, used to tasting all these same different barrels. And I know we've heard it from a lot of the other distillers as well today, that, they're tasting it at cask strength. They're tasting these single barrels to get the right flavor profiles for their blended whiskeys. But for our 101, we were doing a similar kind of process, taking all these barrels, getting the right flavor, matching it so it was consistent. But along the journey, Jimmy just found exceptional barrels. And then from there, created Kentucky Spirit as a way to express that to the world and allow them to taste what Wild Turkey does taste like as a single barrel release at 101 proof and at least 8 years old. So I guess without further ado, who wants to taste some juice? Ollie, you want to taste some Kentucky Spirit with me?
Yeah, I've got my sample ready to go. Let's go.
Awesome. Again, sorry for the other guys that are online that may not have the Kentucky Spirit on there. Now, I don't know if it comes up that well on the screen here, but we have got designations on each of these for when the whiskey was bottled, which rick number it came, and also from which rick house. So when we talk about a company as big as Wild Turkey and as a distillery as that, having that kind of information literally at your fingertips and in your hand as you're enjoying this whiskey is fantastic. Now, Bruce, if you guys are on the app, one of my really, really, really amazing individuals that also is based out of the Wild Turkey Distillery and is a great friend of ours as well, Bruce Russell, who's Eddie's son and now the 3rd generation involved with the distillery as well. He loves this. He actually runs the barrel select programs as well for this specific SKU. But what you're going to start to find is like our telltale, vanilla, caramel, and creme brulee notes starting to come through from here. And as most distillers as well, we are using an Alligator Char, so a grade 4, after a level 2 toast on the inside to really expose the vanillins, get the flavor profiles going to where they need to be.
You're going to have to explain what an Alligator Char is for us.
Okay, cool. So no, we did. I know that it was discussed before as well, but yeah, if anyone that's joining in, so Alligator Char or grade 4 char is basically where it's charred so heavily on the inside at about 900 degrees centigrade for 55 seconds, and it actually cracks the inside of the interior wall of the barrel. So it actually makes it really easy for you to access those wood sugars, those vanillins, those different glycol compounds as well, and where we create all these flavors that end up in our whiskey. And outside of what you happen in the distillate, this actually allows you to bring all those other flavors in there. And with most distilleries as well, you're going to do a toasting run through that. I know Linus was talking about oak from the Ozarks. We definitely take ours from there as well. We get all of our barrels through ISC, Independent Staves Company, out of their Louisville and Frankfurt facilities. And we have ours set to a very specific way. We're using 22 staves per barrel. So we're getting a really great mix of flavors in there. We do actually have a lighter char on the heads. Our heads of the barrels are at a grade 3 char, just to allow a little bit more like horizontal ventilation throughout the barrels as it's aging. We're not rotating barrels at any point in time. We kind of let them sit in there. We've got RFID tags built onto everything to keep an eye on it. And we get to taste, the odd 720,000 barrels. We get to them about once a year just to check on how they're doing. Yeah, I see David's laughing. He's like, that's a lot of barrels. And in the grand scheme of it, it is, but it's also not. Trust me, there are other producers. Again, we've heard the words MGP before that have got many, many, many more doing with what they're doing. But one of the biggest things you find from this release is going to bring a little bit more of that like burnt orange, citrusy notes starting to come away throughout there. Get a little bit of banana bread on this specific one as well from Warehouse S, but it's just super delicious, but really nice and full. And that 101 profile, and that 101 proof on there, or 50.5% for those playing at home, really helps cut through a lot of that sweetness. Now, anyone who asks me about Wild Turkey, like, we have our best singing liquids at least 90 proof. I love our liquids at 100 proof and above personally. It really suits my flavor profile. I like that robust, high rye, like minimal water added post-aging characteristic of our whiskeys.
For me, this is just going to say super, super creamy. You obviously have all the common, you know, bourbon notes, vanilla notes that we're expecting of something of this caliber. But yeah, it's the higher proof around 100. For those at home, it's just divided by 2. So when you see the US designation of proof, just divided by 2, and that's your ABV, basically. That's how we get that number. But yeah, super creamy, mate. This is delicious.
Yeah, and it's real. And realistically, even if we have barrels at 8 years old, if they don't hit the kind of flavor spectrums that Jimmy and Eddie set for Kentucky Spirit, which is still always quite individual and unique, but they do have that more creamy mouthfeel as a telltale sign. But we've got other products that it can make its way into as well. And we are looking at least 8 years old in this, even though it's no longer age statemented. And once the age statement dropped off from the US release as well of the standard 101, we always kept Kentucky Spirit at that at least 8-year-old kind of flavor profile as well.
Awesome. So was there another question from one of the panelists just then?
Not that I can see.
No worries. Well, I might very quickly, we've got one more brand who unfortunately couldn't make it today, New Riff, but I've got David from the Whiskey Show who's got a bottle of the rye. He might walk us through very, very quickly.
Thanks, Ollie. The New Riff, and interesting bottles, as you can see. It's the shaded top and graduate bottom. It's at 50%, and just throw some in the glass.
Oh, you didn't pre-pour.
Well, I've in my pack I only got one glass, so I've had to kind of rotate it around. But New Riff's interesting. It's relatively new. It's a Kentucky distillery established in 2014, and the founder and owner Ken Lewis says, and I love this phrase, and Dave from Reservoir alluded to being an electrical engineer, as I was as well. And there's a bunch of what they call corporate refugees. I think that's quite a common trend. The allure of whiskey and distilling attracts a whole lot of people who like to throw the shackles off their jacket and tie and have a bit of a change. And so what established 2014 in Kentucky, and all they was then they do the bourbon as well as the rye that we've got here, and both of them are in the packs, are all bottled in bond. And it's a phrase that we haven't heard today yet, so let's just quickly touch on that. Bottled in bond is it's basically a consumer protection law that was enacted in 1897, and what it means is that it's you have to essentially let's look at the definitions. It must be the product of a single distiller in a single season. So spring, either January to June in the US, or fall, July to December, autumn, aged for a minimum of 4 years, and in a bonded warehouse, bottled at 50% ABV. So why the term bottled in bond? Because as part of the kind of the attraction and the perk, there was tax incentives for distillers to participate in the bottled in bond program, and they delay their excise payments until the whiskey's been matured for at least those 4 years. So they get a bit of a tax break for that period, and they don't have to pay the excise. So really, this is a kind of that consumer guarantee that we're getting a lot now, and a lot of the brands we're talking today talked about that disclosure of where the whiskey was actually distilled and what the brands do to tweak it to their styles. But the bottled in bond really means that this is it's produced, distilled in the one premises, and bottled at that 50% ABV. Now this rye, the mash bill is 95% rye and 5% malted rye, which is quite unique and different process. So it's pretty much 100% rye, but 5% is malted. Quite citrus forward. And they do say that it is great for old fashions, and I'd agree with that.
Dave, obviously, I doubt you'll know because it's not your brand. But you know why they've gone that 95% mash bill? That's
I tried. I was curious. I couldn't find much as to why. If everybody's got more information, please share with the group.
My very quick research, because I had to record the videos for these last night, was they are following an old Kentucky recipe. So they're obviously using new processes, new technology, but they are trying to stay true to the old Kentucky ways of making a rye whiskey.
Okay.
I don't know if that's true or not. That's what I got from very quick Googling. So maybe we need to take that offline.
That's pretty weird. Again, I don't know how if Linus has got some idea on that, if historically, but again, say the Wild Turkey house rye style was very Maryland influenced. So it's actually, not anywhere near that kind of a rye content. So that's an interesting kind of influence when you talk about rye whiskey, from a traditional standpoint, not stemming from Kentucky.
It's really interesting because obviously the Woodford Reserve rye, we used an old mash bill for a place called Millhouse rye in the 1870s, and that's 33 rye to 33 corn to 14% malted barley. And it's really interesting because they needed the enzymes from the barley to actually start the fermentation process. So that's really interesting. I might do a bit of research on that because that's actually really that's really quirky and different. Yeah,
it's super cool.
And they're getting their rye from one farmer in Indiana, who he was growing his rye, but he wasn't using. No other distillery was using it, and they said, "Well, let's give it a go." And it's 50% ABV, but those of you trying it, it's quite gentle at that. It's quite interesting, quite soft, not overly spiced. Bit of mint as well.
It's super approachable. I was drinking this last night. It's
interesting. It's that got that buttery, creamy mouthfeel to it, and it's it just sits. I haven't tried with any water, so let's give it just a few drops. See if that changes anything.
The reason why, unfortunately, we just didn't have enough whiskey. Some of these whiskeys in our kits are so limited. We wanted to get it into the hands of consumers, but Linus jumped online and grabbed his own kit. But in future virtual tastings, we do want to hopefully create kits for all the presenters as well, so we can drink along at home and give feedback as we're doing it.
I'd love to try this one. Sounds nice, particularly at 95% rye and not too spicy. Sounds very interesting.
Yeah, I've got my notes sorted.
It's I don't know, a drop of water, just that orange rind comes through on the finish. I think my homework for this evening is going to have to be in old-fashioned.
Awesome. Well, before we ask some questions around the general trends of the industry and stuff, Linus, you hinted at it before, but let me promote it here. So here's the quick URL to visit our Whiskey Show app. Our website in terms of buying the shop. All the bottles that we've tried, there is limited stock on some bottles. So like the Cherrywood, there's only 6 bottles available, and I'm seeing people are jumping online now to buy some. Same as the Wild Turkey, the 13, etc. So all the whiskies are there. Obviously, download the app, because in the app, all the information about the whiskey is there. Tristan hinted at Eddie Russell, the current boss of Wild Turkey. He's in his own living room, in his own kitchen, just recorded a video of talking about the whiskey as casual as it gets. So it's great to jump in. Don't forget to rate your whiskeys. But and if you go into the app, click through and buy, there's discounts and things automatically get applied. But everyone who attended, I sent through an email around 11:30 today with a link to buy, and there's some information about how to get some discounts on some of the bottles and stuff today as well. But that's kind of just my little quick spiel about buying. I do have some questions to all of you. So premiumization as a trend, which is drink less but drink better, is obviously growing, and consumers are more interested about the story of the brand, the transparency that we've alluded to. A lot of information's on the website on the bottles themselves this year. What's each of the brands, I guess, doing to kind of capitalize on that trend? Linus, I might hit you up first to hit that one.
Yeah, I think not only are they drinking better, they're more open to new ideas and they're chasing flavor. So that's really, really exciting. And I think we've kind of been ahead of the game, obviously, with the Masters collection and that one-off, that one-off every expression of Woodford Reserve, trying new and unique things. I think from us, obviously, from a core perspective, obviously, you'll see the malt become a regular thing next year, and hopefully the wheat as well. And I'm going to tease you now. If you can get on a plane, who'd have thought, and you can get to Woodford Reserve, we have these half bottles where we're trying even more crazier things. Like this is a double oak, we've got a double oak, and they're all limited editions. So I'm just teasing myself because I can't get there either. But if you can go there,
I heard USA's opening 13th of November, apparently.
I've heard these things too, but I can't see me getting there for a fair while, which is unfortunate. A little bit off topic, other SKU, Old Forester is doing these crazy things, and we have got the Old Forester birthday bourbon, which has now become this unicorn bourbon that I haven't tried for far too long. So I know obviously Jack Daniels, we've got obviously the Snarcher Select, which is a pretty interesting, quirky take on Jack Daniels. We're actually putting grooves in our staves to get more wood contact. I think you're going to see more ideas from smoke, from barrels to barrel finishes to mash bills. I think it's such an exciting time for American whiskey. I've been in whiskey for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this as well. So really exciting ahead for Woodford Reserve, Jack Daniels, obviously Old Forester. But I won't take up all the time. I hand it over to Dave and Tristan because I've been having talking far too much. So I'll just mute myself and let you guys talk.
I like Australian consumers, our access to American-made bourbon, ryes, wheats, even malted barley. It's the range has doubled in even the last year, and it's going to triple in the next 2-3 years. So we're very lucky down under. But Tristan, what's something new and exciting from Wild Turkey that we can look forward to?
Yeah, again, in a similar kind of line to where Linus was at, definitely the ideas of experimentation, but keeping it also grounded in tradition, I think is something that people are seeing. And again, with what Eddie does with the Masters Keep series that he's been having out since he was named, head Code Master Distiller in 2015, he's always been pushing that through there. And every year we get a singular limited release of a small amount of bottles, which are beautifully handcrafted. I think Ollie's just grabbing one, hopefully, to use as that, because I've got my collection downstairs at the moment. My wife's getting ready before we have a nice day out, but what we're going to see is things like that. Yeah, so that was our second ever bottled in bond release. So, that is, it's 17 years old, Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey under the bottled in bond program and hitting all those allocations and laws. So for us, the next one coming out, which just got announced into the US, launching pretty much now, is the Masters Keep 1. And one thing that Eddie is always in front of his mind is what his dad thinks about what he's doing, no matter which way it is. Like, he learned everything he did, not just from people who work at the distillery, but obviously his father being, the master distiller. And what he's done, he's created these 3 different spectrums of age picks between 8, 10, and 14 years old. And they've brought that together for a very collaborative Masters Keep release. That's the kind of next new thing from us. I do also know as well, we might see a little bit more Wild Turkey 13 in Australia towards the end of the year as well. Just a small amount.
I'd love to see some more 101 rye.
More whiskeys.
David, you're very aligned on that. Look, it's definitely one of those discussions. Look, as we've seen, as you guys would all know from what we've seen in the last 10, 15 years with bourbon, Wild Turkey, like any rye producer is just producing more and more and more and more rye. So the thirst is there for it globally, but in the United States, it's crazy. Over there we've got the Ross's Reserve 6-year-old rye, single barrel rye available, and obviously the ever wonderful 101, and now joined by the rare breed rye. So rye's a big thing there, and yes, hopefully, fingers are crossed. I know my brand managers are on the line as well, so fingers are crossed, guys, so we can get a little bit to here.
Well, on behalf of all the bartenders watching, yes, we love the 101 rye. We're very sad that it's all gone from Australia, at least.
Trust me, it was definitely one of the first high quality ryes. That and definitely, Sazerac and Rittenhouse as well were probably the 3 original ones that we saw being used in bars at that first precipice of bourbon coming back into fashion, and bartenders testing out different drinks with American whiskey.
Yep.
I love the brand love here. Dave, just before I cut to you, I've got a question I didn't earlier promo, but we were drinking it during the cherry wood. So Linus from YouTube, Mr. G-Man says regarding the cherry wood, slightly higher ABV, and Cascode also agreed. So I don't know if there's a chance that there'll be ever a future high ABV cherry wood, but there's just some feedback from the audience, so they would love it.
Never say never. Never say never with a Woodford Reserve, but I will say it's bumped up that ABV because they think that's the best expression of that whiskey. But never say never. It's
fair point. Dave, anything exciting from Whistlepig and Balcones that we can look forward to?
Yeah, so I suppose Whistlepig, their journey, or what they've set out to try and do, is make their own whiskey. So they're very fast approaching their own distillate, timber, and rye. So they have what's called the Farm Stock series, which is released. We're on batch number 3, which we're lucky enough to get here in Australia now. So that's in market now as we speak. It's a very limited release. We didn't have obviously a massive allocation, but there is some stock here. But the main aim for Whistlepig in the future is growing their own rye, making their own distillate. They've got a small copper pot still with a 9-plate column or reflux on top. So yeah, that's definitely what they're trying to aim for, is that triple terroir stuff. And as farm stock gets a little bit further along, batch 3 I think is 52% their own rye, distillate, and oak. And that Vermont oak, that's it's very, very unique. It's actually that species of oak that grows there in Vermont is the northernmost growing oak tree in the world. So very, very tight, compact growth rings in there, and very, very interesting flavor characteristics from that particular type of species. So that's where Whistlepig are heading. They're trying to make as much as their own stuff as possible, but then still keeping the 10, the 12, and the 15 as core releases. So they're never going to go away. They're always going to be sourced liquid from ADL up in Alberta. So those core brands or core SKUs will never go away, and they'll just start expanding into making their own stuff more and more, which is great.
I had actually a comment here, and it might be a good tie into what Balcones is doing with the blue corn.
Yeah, what's this? Any plans on old school corn varieties? Well, with Balcones, funnily enough, their very first release was 100% roasted blue corn whiskey. So blue corn, native to that sort of New Mexico, Texas, Mexican area, is an heirloom style corn. And funnily enough, I was reading up on corn varieties the other day. There's over 250 heirloom styles or varieties of corn in America. There were much more originally. They've sadly been sort of, petered out and whatnot and made into the yellow corn that we know today. But yes, we do have quite a lot of corn whiskies in the Balcones SKU. And as Linus touched on it, a lot of sort of smoked whiskies are kind of coming back into that category. And, mesquite smoke from wild turkey, funnily enough, or mesquite barrel. But we use Texas scrub oak to smoke some of our blue corn whiskies, which gives it a really unique smoky flavor. But yeah, we definitely use a lot of local or indigenous stuff down in Texas for Balcones, and blue corn's one of them. So yeah, good question.
Awesome.
I've got a quick insight for you. We have got one of our master's collections was the 1838 white corn, which is almost gone, sadly. But we actually got an old variety that would have been around 1838. It was white corn before its density it went to obviously being yellow corn, and it was just quirky and different and really, really actually very different actually. So it's just amazing how much when you're changing the corn styles, how much it can actually affect the whiskey. But it was a fascinating whiskey, and there's 0.2 left, I'm sad to say. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Sorry guys.
I love the experimentation and innovation that's coming out of the States right now. Like each distillery that we've had on today, there's so much innovation, every style, whether it's different barrel programs or the type of grain used or everything in your process, or even just your maturing process, like using smoked malts like the cherry wood today. It's just been, there's so much to dive into. People go, oh, just a bourbon, and you think bourbon and Coke, and I'm like, those days are over personally. Like, yes, love it. I got into dark spirits through bourbon and Cokes at age 18 at the local RSL. But today we are spoiled for choice, and today I think we've had 9 out of 18 whiskies to get through a huge diverse range of quality. But Yeah, any final words? I might hand over to Tristan first. We'll go through all three of you before David's got a big announcement about the whiskey show coming up soon. But just to wrap things up, Tristan.
Yeah, look, guys, again, just been an absolute pleasure being on here. Anyone that has questions around wild turkey and the like, look, feel free to jump either onto my Instagram at Trista Campari Guy, or feel free to reach out to our different brand channels and pages that we have around. And obviously the websites that we have around the world for wild turkey is basically a tome of all different areas of what we do and a great information source for those wanting to do some research.
Awesome. Cheers, mate. Dave?
First and foremost, thank you very much for having me on. And yeah, if there's any more sort of follow-up questions you've got on either of the brands, I'm more than happy to answer them, because I mean I could talk for hours on end just for one of these brands alone. So it's a little bit condensed in this one here. But yeah, thank you very much for having me.
How do people reach you?
They can reach me through Iconic Beverages. So we're the national distribution team for these two brands. So you can find us on the web or on Facebook, or we could probably pop up some links in the description below, I think, after this.
Yeah, no worries. I'll do a follow-up email for the show attendees anyway, so we can provide some details there. But Linus, any final words from your side?
Yeah, big thanks to Ollie and Dave for having us. Again, it was always top event, and thank you for what you do for our brands. Thanks to the customers for jumping on and supporting our brands. We truly appreciate it. If I tell the guys to go to Woodford Reserve, where 12 people were we're having a session in Melbourne, Australia, it would just blow their minds. So thank you guys. It means the absolute world to us. For more information, woodreserve.com is a brilliant resource of information. I am at Who Would Have Thought. I am at Geeky Spirit Guy on Instagram. So any questions you have, feel free to DM me. I love answering geeky questions. If I don't know, I'll ask someone who does. I'll email Chris or Liz McCall in America and ask the question. So thanks, guys, and I hope to see you in person. Who'd have thought in person? Maybe next year at a whiskey show or an event like that. So thank you, guys. Yeah, I'm in Melbourne, so we're still in lockdown here, but hopefully. So
hopefully
thanks,
very
guys.
soon.
And also,
well, thanks,
Dave and Tristan. You're both legends, guys.
Awesome. Well, just a couple final words from me, and then I'll hand it over to David for one big announcement. Hopefully that's come up on screen. So we presented this USA Whiskey Show in partnership with Man of Many, Whiskey Hunt Australia, and the Brass Facebook group, which is Bourbon, Rye, Australian Sipping Society. So jump online and support the three of them as well. They've been huge supporters of us in the past as well. So big thanks to them for helping us get the word of this show out. Don't forget to jump into the app again to download and watch all the videos, learn about all the whiskeys the distilleries presented today, rate your favorites, and don't forget to buy. And we got our 2 show exclusives only available right now to buy. And there's a little details about how to get excited about those 2 bottlings that David has done. But Linus, David, and Tristan, I might say farewell to you, the big 3 of you. Thank you so much for joining us today and spending an hour and a bit with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers. And David, I might hand it over to you to tell us about the next whiskey show.
Well, firstly, thanks for everybody who's joined us this afternoon, and a special shout out who doesn't get much recognition is Ollie himself. It's the proverbial duck on the pond. It looks like it's all smooth sailing on the top. He's cruising through this. It runs like clockwork. 2 hours almost on the dot. But underneath, there's the feet are frantically going. He's doing 17 things at once to pull all the show together. So well done, Ollie. Another sterling effort. They just get better and better and a lot slicker. I know there's a lot of work trying to corral all of the distilleries and the brands to get everything in time, but it's certainly come together nicely. But don't say you don't hear it first from us at the Whiskey Show and the Whiskey List. And as Paul said in one of the chats, let's get physical. Well, we are going to. You've had the, especially in Melbourne, the snap lockdowns. We're having a snap breakout whiskey show. Last week, when the New South Wales government said we can now play with others, we said, well, let's just do this. 12th and 13th of November, Sir Stamford at Circular Quay, we are going to have a real life whiskey show. It's a smaller format, a lot more compact. We still have the 1 person per 4 square meter restrictions, so we can only have 60 odd people per session. We're going to have 5 sessions, 2 on the Friday, 3 on the Saturday. A lot of whiskies, we've handpicked them that are going to be new releases, stuff that you wouldn't have seen in Australia before. Some recent arrivals that have just hit the shelves literally in the last couple of weeks will be there to sample and to buy. Something unique, a different format. Last time, those of you who were at the May show in Sydney, we were forced to have everybody seated. A lot of people like that format, more intimate chats, almost like a fireside chat with the brand ambassadors presenting the whiskies. Well, we're going to take that one step further. Now we've got fewer people. It's going to be really cozy sessions, relaxed atmosphere. Really looking forward to it. We'll be releasing tickets sometime in the next week. You'll get the emails coming out to all people who've been to our previous shows, get first dibs. So 5 sessions, 60 people, 300 tickets, that's all. Quite a little compact show. Looking forward to it. It's been a long time, literally between drinks. And those of you who are in Sydney or can travel to Sydney, hopefully we'll see you there.
And how many brands are we roughly expecting? 10, 11?
Sorry, there'll be between 10 and 12 stands only. That's all we can fit in. So really focusing on those brands that are new to Australia, new to the market, and stuff that's been recently released.
Awesome. And for those around the state, obviously we've been in lockdown and Melbourne's having some trouble. But as soon as borders open up and we can travel again, we're planning on doing shows elsewhere, right?
Yeah, and this is the format that we want to trial here to take on the road. So it's something that we can put out there very quickly. So literally we're doing this within 4 weeks, so a month to turn around. We can do the same in Melbourne, in Adelaide, in Brisbane, a slick format, boutique shows, and that's, if it works here, that's definitely, as soon as we can, we're going to hit the road.
Awesome. And yeah, I've got a comment here from Cameron, who's saying unfortunately you can't come down from Queensland to Sydney, but Cameron, if this format works and your premiere opens the borders, we will definitely be bringing the whiskey show up to Brisbane as well. Awesome. Well, that's exciting news, David. I'm glad that we can actually, it's awesome doing these virtually, but physical tastings in front of the brands and getting, each of the brand representatives to pour and, get a bit of FaceTime. We've all missed it. Huge shout out to just hospitality around Australia as well. They've all been doing tough with bars being shut down. So as bars start opening up around the country, please support your local whiskey bar. They're the ones who, bite the bullet and take some of these amazing whiskeys that you can try per dram basically behind the bar. Otherwise, big thanks to the Whiskey Show who curates these kits together and work with bringing a huge diverse selection of whiskey down under for us to try, and the virtual ones means everyone nationally across Australia gets a chance to do it. So big thank you, David, and your team for putting all the hard work in sourcing bottles, curating them, even filling our little sample bottles and putting the stickers on them. That's hours of work, but hopefully everyone at home has enjoyed the quality of the kits. And like you said, it's a third iteration, so we take learnings from each kit and improve each tasting as we go.
Yeah, and it's these virtual shows won't end here. Even though we're going to be having physical shows, there'll be, like we did in May, hybrids and just curated virtual shows in specific categories. So as you said, we take the feedback, we learn, and we keep innovating.
And just final shout out, don't forget to rate all 18 whiskies. Automatically you go in the running to win some whiskey. And don't forget the shop is now open, so if there's any that you enjoyed in your tasting kits today, they'll be available. Because this is a try at home experience, we suggest to take about 2 weeks to enjoy all 18 whiskies. We don't recommend doing all 18 in a single couple hour session. That's why we only did one per brand today. But hopefully you've enjoyed today, and we'll see you at the next tasting, David. And thank you to yourself and the entire team, and we'll see you at the next one.
Right. Cheers, everyone. Enjoy your whiskies.
Cheers. Just a couple of comments coming through. Thanks, Paul. Thanks everyone at home who stayed for the entire 2 hours. We'll see you at the next one.